indicate how rock is strong, it's a foundation, and we do the hand motions, or the foolish man built his house upon the sand, and so rock and sand just become object lessons for the strength and stability of Jesus versus the instability of not following Jesus. Or I remember as a kid, one of my Bible class teachers bringing in a little mustard seed and just showing us how small a mustard seed is, and then looking at those parables from Jesus where he says that the kingdom of God is like something that grew out of a mustard seed. It started with something very small and grew into something very large, where the birds could come and rest for safety. Well, here I think Jesus has an object lesson for Peter and for the first disciples. So I want to read through verses 1 through 11 in this text, and we're just going to notice some key phrases along the way. And I'm going to give you a heads up. There's nothing fancy about this morning's lesson. We're just going to look at the text and walk through it, think about what's happening, and make some present-day applications about activating our work of evangelism as individuals and in churches. So let's start with verses 1 and 2. It says that, "So it was, as the multitude pressed about to hear the word of God, that he stood by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw two boats standing by the lake." Now, I think the two boats are part of that object lesson. Okay? Because what are the two boats doing? The two boats are doing not what they're really intended to do. They're standing by the lake. They're not doing anything. The fishermen had gone from them. There's no fishermen in them, and they were now washing their nets. There's a key application that I want you to take from these first two verses, and that is when you have an idle boat, you're going to have an empty boat, and the boat's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. So Luke begins this section of his account by pointing out these two empty boats to his readers. Now imagine it, two boats, they're not in the midst of the water, occupied by fishermen, they're standing by the lake. In other words, the boats are sitting dockside. They may be propped up against something as the water drains out of them, if you've ever had to drain out a boat. But the boats are not boating. Okay? The fishermen are not fishing. They're not even prepping the nets to fish. They're just washing their nets and they're quitting. That's important. They've quit doing the work. They're packing up the tackle after an unprofitable work day. So essentially what we have here in the scene, we've got fishermen who are not fishing. We've got boats that aren't out in the water. We've got nets, but they're not out in the sea. And that sounds like a pretty useless situation. And it's not like the fishermen are doing nothing. They're just not doing anything productive to the work of actual fishing. And so the key point for us is that an idle boat's going to be an empty boat. And here's how I want to make an application with that. Idle churches who are not evangelizing are going to end up being empty churches. Stop for a minute and ask yourself whether that sounds like a familiar situation when it comes to the church and the people of God today. I know there have been phases in churches and times in churches, or there are churches where you feel like maybe you have given up, or maybe even the church has just kind of given up on evangelism. I've heard people literally say, why would we go out and go door knocking? Why do we even have gospel meetings? That kind of stuff just doesn't do any good anymore. Well, if you don't do anything, then just prepare to die. Because that's what's going to happen to you as a church if we do nothing. And so there's people who really have thrown their hands up, just kind of given up and quit. Maybe that's because we go through dry seasons, or we go through a spell, or we've gotten rejected a time or two. We've gotten discouraged by that. But some churches, some people, have really just given up on evangelism. And so we're in a similar situation. We're a Christian, just like these guys were fishermen, but just like they've quit doing fishing, there are some Christians who are on a hiatus from doing the work of Christianing, right? Making other Christians. We're still mowing the church yard. We're still cleaning the church building. We're still setting out the communion trays and coming to the services, but for some people, that's as far as it gets. The nets are clean, but they're on the shore. The baptistry's clean, but it's not being used. Was this weekend, so that's awesome. But like the idle fishermen, many Christians are just going through the motions of religion and not doing the real work. Now, what's the real work? Well, I think the real work is that we're living for and we're leading other people to Jesus. The marching orders of the church are found in Matthew chapter 28, 18 through 20. Jesus says, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you after you've baptized them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's the work of the church. Those are the marching orders of the church. Go make disciples. Go fish for men. Go find people to be disciples of Jesus. But with many, the feet, even though that's the marching orders of the church, the feet are content to stay at home. The car's still parked in the driveway instead of crossing over the tracks. Nobody's boat is willing to cross an ocean. Nobody's flight is booked to go where the gospel is hot. People won't even click a button to share a sermon. That's the easiest way you could ever possibly evangelize. Just get on the Norwalk Church of Christ Facebook page, which I see Keith posting stuff all the time, and it's really good stuff. Share it. Share it with somebody. Let people see what's going on here, what they can learn from this congregation. That's a very easy, simple way to do evangelism in a culture where everybody is staring at their phones all the time. But a lot of people won't even click a button. Send out a text invite to a friend. Text somebody and say, we're having a gospel meeting today. Why don't you come at 10:30? And hear the message preached. We've got all the tools, more tools to spread the gospel in our modern culture than ever before, but the tools are just sitting in the shed unused. And the nets are on the shore and the boat's docked. So do you ever feel like sometimes that's the state of many churches today? We're like physicians sitting in a hospital waiting room instead of getting out into the ER helping people who have real urgent soul needs. We're like golf pros who sit in the clubhouse enjoying the time instead of going out to the course to improve our game. If our spiritual life was a boat, we'd all just be kind of a comfortable yacht that sits in the marina instead of a lifeboat that goes out into the dangerous depths to rescue souls. That's what we're supposed to be as Christians. And if we're fishermen, we'd be like some of these folks sometimes, just done. You ever feel like that? You're there, but you're unenthused, unenergetic, uninvolved. Now, what is it that we really need to motivate us to do our work? Well, let's look at verses 3 and 4, and I think what we see is a great example of leadership from Jesus. We need somebody like Jesus who steps up and says, this is what we got to start doing, brother. And so Jesus gets into one of the boats. He takes that thing that's propped up on the side of the shore, and he gets into it, and he pushes out in it, and says, let's go fishing. And I love that. Look at verses 3 and 4. He got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and he asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down, and he taught the multitudes from the boat. So he goes out there, does some teaching. Verse 4, when he had stopped speaking, he said to Simon, launch out into the deep where more fish are, and let down your nets for a catch. So what I want you to see is, in this text, Jesus does what good leaders do. Simple lesson that I think we learn from this text. Leaders break the cycle of inactivity. We need leaders in churches who say, you know what, you may not be doing the work of God and going out fishing for men, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to start talking to people about Jesus. I'm going to start lifting Jesus up to people. I'm going to start inviting people to have Bible studies with me and just being open about my faith. I'm not going to be ashamed of Jesus. Leaders break the cycle of inactivity, and that's what Jesus does here. He takes the initiative to do what the fishermen should have been doing. He changes the atmosphere and the expectation, not just by what he says, but by what he does. Plenty of people talk, not everybody does. And Simon lets Jesus get into his boat. That's what we all need to do. He got into one of the boats, which was Simon's. So he doesn't sit there idle. He doesn't just complain about these lazy fishermen. Oh, these guys are so lazy. We can't. He just says, I'm going to get in this boat, and I'm going to show them how it's done. We're going to do it. You might consider a contextual point about Jesus himself. This is something that Barclay writes in his commentary, and I thought it was interesting. In chapter 4, verse 16, Barclay says, the last time we heard Jesus preach, he was in a synagogue. Now, he is at the lakeside. He got kind of rejected in the synagogue. You remember that? Quote something, basically says that this applies to him, and the people respond in verse 22, isn't this Joseph's son? Isn't this just the carpenter's son? Who does he think he is? So the synagogue door kind of gets closed to Jesus, and it doesn't matter. Jesus turns his pulpit into a boat, and so Barclay points out he would go anywhere where people will listen to him. You're not going to listen to me in the synagogue? We're going to go out on the seashore and we're going to go find some people. And there's going to be some people to listen to. He uses the boat to teach the multitudes on the shore. But he uses the boat as an object lesson for Peter and the other disciples. Peter's boat needed to get out of the dock and needed to do what it was meant to do. And though Peter and the disciples had given up, Jesus tells them, he says in verse 4, launch out into the deep, let down your nets for a catch. Now here's what I also want you to see from Jesus. Notice the optimism of Jesus. The optimism. If churches are going to begin to become more evangelistic and do what God's called us to do, then we need people who are optimistic leaders. Pessimism really kills people's motivation and urge to do what God has called us to do. We need people who are optimistic about doing the work. And so Jesus is basically saying, let's go out here, let down your nets for a catch. Come on, there's some fish out here, boys. Let's get to work. He knows he's on the verge of another miracle. So maybe it's easy for him to be optimistic. You might think that, well, of course, he's Jesus, so it's easy to be optimistic. But it's important for us to learn from his optimism. When you feel like your spiritual life has been slow, you're stuck in a routine, you're going nowhere, then maybe it's time to let Jesus back in the boat, let him direct your steps, and kind of let Jesus take the wheel, or in this case, Jesus take the oars. Right? But let Jesus start leading you. I'm going to give you some examples of people who I think have really done this. And this is where we just get kind of just real practical and simple. And I want to motivate you by some of these examples. I'll go back to when I was preaching in Kokomo, Indiana. I was there for 15 years. We had a man who, he really wanted to preach, but he had Tourette's actually. And so him public preaching, the Tourette's would go off, and it probably wasn't the best thing for him. And he wasn't probably going to find a place to preach full time, but he still loved souls, he loved people. And so what he decided to do was, I'm going to go to nursing homes. And I'm going to work with people in nursing homes, some who are about to die. And you know what? He converted a lot of people in nursing homes by just going there and sitting by people's bedside and talking to people about the gospel, going from room to room in nursing homes with people who were lonely and who had death on their mind. And he went there and he would just talk to people about the Bible. And that pulpit wasn't really open to him. He didn't have a lot of opportunities there. So he turned the bedside of a nursing home into his pulpit. Convert people in those places. We've got a man, I was preaching in Anderson, Indiana before I moved down to Florence, Alabama, and we had one of our elders there, Vernon. He's a retired electrician, and I think he realized after he retired, I'm a little bit bored, and he goes down to Columbia for 3 weeks every year, takes a trip there. He used to go with some other preachers, now he goes by himself, and he goes from church to church, teaching people, encouraging people, baptizes people a lot of times when he's there. He takes 3 weeks off every year and goes down there and does that work. Just decided, I'm going to start doing it. I'm going to do something with my time, do something that's good. He's a very capable teacher, as elders should be. And he goes down there and uses that time for that. We have a man in our congregation at Helton Drive. And Keith went on a trip to Israel with him. I just found out about 10 or 12 years ago. And he gave up full-time preaching at a congregation, I think around 2012, maybe just a few years, about a decade ago, and decided, I'm just going to start going overseas and preaching overseas. And so every other month, he goes overseas and he preaches the gospel every other month. I'll just give you an example. This is from 2024. He preached on 4 continents, preached in both hemispheres. 70 people were baptized in 2024. And that year he was 81 years old. Just last month, he just got back from Burundi. baptized 19 people while he was in Burundi just last month. He's 84 years old now. Still. And he's taking off tomorrow morning to go overseas again to Zimbabwe and Tanzania. And then he'll go to Canada for a couple of weeks and then come back for a month. 84 years old. I love telling the story about Ed because Ed to me is an inspiration of a guy who, and sometimes I think, Ed, aren't you getting a little bit old for this? Ed doesn't care. If he's still got a mind and he's still got a voice and he's still got a, he's going to preach wherever he's at, wherever he can. I was in Barnesville, Ohio. I love this example, and some of this may be close enough now. We're in Ohio that you might know. Some of y'all might know this person, but I've held a couple meetings in Barnesville, and there's a lady there who converted from Catholicism, and she said, and when I converted, people would say things from the pulpit like, well, you guys know this story, right? And she said, I would be sitting there thinking, no, I don't know that story. I've never heard that story. I don't know the Bible like you assume I know. And so she decided with a couple of other people who had that same mentality, we're just going to get together and we're just going to start studying through the Bible and just learning the stories of the Bible so that we can say, yeah, I do know that story now. And so her with 2 or 3 other people, they got together at the church building. I think it started somewhere else actually, and now it's at the church building. But they got together with 2 or 3 people, and they would just study section by section. They worked through like a junior high class book. They just walked through the Bible. And they started doing this, and this was probably over a decade ago. Well, now there's 22, 23 people who regularly attend this class, all ladies. I think it's on a Tuesday morning. And that's what they do every week because she's found other people in the community, other people from the congregation who also just want to study through the Bible. She prepares the lessons, and these women just get together at the church building every week. If you build it, they will come. There's people who are interested in the gospel out there. Don't tell me that there aren't. But sometimes we're just not doing much fishing for men. I could tell you story after story similar to that. Where I'm at Hilton Drive, we got Bible studies all the time. And those Bible studies lead to opportunities. I've got a Thursday night college study during the semester. We do 10 of those per semester. And so we have about 20 college kids at our home, and those college kids bring other college kids and gives you opportunity to teach other kids. On Friday mornings, after these college kids are at my house all night long, we do a 7 a.m. study at Chick-fil-A, which I'm very tired. And so there's a few of us men that get together there, and that provides opportunities to study with other people. We've done Bible readings in the park in the summertime for a month. We'll just study through a book, and we'll have 60 people from the congregation who come out and just bring their lawn chairs, and we study out in the park, and other people come and join us. We got gospel meetings and back-to-school Bible studies, and we've got our young adults that meet once a month, and guess what? They bring other young adults. When they have that study once a month, we have a Golden Agers group that meets on Tuesday morning. Our older people, most of the retirees, because not everybody can come during the day to a morning study, and older people come. We're studying through grief right now. Think about grief, and think about the hope of Jesus in the midst of our grief. So it gives us an opportunity to talk to even older people about the gospel, but those people come. If you do the work, if you will generate interest if you just go out and do the work. And that's important for us to all get involved in as a church. I can't do it all either. I try to say that. I'm just one person. I don't lead all of these studies. I don't lead all the young adult studies. I don't lead every study. I got other people helping with a lot of stuff. We have some women who now get together and they're studying through the Case for Christ on Tuesday mornings from our congregation. And it started with just 2 or 3 of them wanting to get together. Now it's 10 or 12. It started 3 months ago. And now they meet at a coffee shop every other week and they study through the Case for Christ. And they get together and they talk a little bit after that. But they're studying together. They want to study. And it's exciting they're doing it. And I'm not involved with that at all. They just do it. So, we need to do it. Well, sometimes we may not feel like doing it. And what you find here is a little bit of pushback from Simon, but that's also coupled with some trust. So, verse 5 says, Simon answered and said to him, Master, we've toiled all night and caught nothing. You ever feel like that with evangelism? Well, I've been trying to do something, but I haven't got anywhere. And sometimes there's peaks and valleys in preaching and teaching and evangelism. You go through moments where the fish are biting. You go through moments where the fish aren't biting. Any fisherman knows that, right? Sometimes you go out, you don't catch anything. So Simon feels like that right now. And he says, nevertheless, though, at your word, I will let down the net. But I'm going to trust you, Jesus. And when they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their net was breaking, so they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came, and they filled both the boats, so that they began to sink. And when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. So notice, Peter didn't really feel like doing what Jesus said, just like sometimes we may not. But he does what Jesus calls him to do. I do understand the feeling of disheartenment and disappointment, and sometimes just being tired and exhausted. Preachers get burnt out too. We get tired. We get to those points where we're just kind of exhausted and burnt out, and we're tired of being rejected. And then to add insult to injury, here's a carpenter telling a fisherman how to fish. Have you thought about that? Peter's maybe thinking, come on, carpenter. What are you telling me how to catch fish for? This is what I do. This is not your field. That's like a plumber telling an electrician how to run wire, right? That's like a restaurant accountant telling the cook how to grill the steak. You're out of your territory, buddy. But Peter trusts Jesus. He's learned enough about Jesus to know, well, I just need to trust you. And so Simon has the right attitude for every weary soul. And that is, I need to be reminded that the Lord has said that if you'll do this, I can bless it. And so don't grow weary in well-doing. Continue in the word. Be consistent and persistent in it. And the Lord can bless it. And Jesus does just that. They catch something that's far beyond their ability to even hardly haul in. The boat starts to sink. They've got so many fish coming in. There's a simple lesson there that I think we need to learn. It goes back to principle of Proverbs 3. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. We just got to learn to trust. And we could apply that not just to evangelism, but to anything. We've got to do marriage his way. You may get to a point of exhaustion in your marriage where things don't seem like they're going really well. Keep doing things his way. Keep doing marriage his way. Keep doing parenting his way. I promise you, because I just about got finished raising 3 teenagers. My youngest daughter graduates in 2 days, on Tuesday when I get back. That's my youngest. And there's going to be times when you're raising those teenagers where I'm tired of doing it Jesus' way. I'm about ready to take a frying pan to these kids' heads. You know, you get worn out. Keep doing parenting his way. Trusting his way. Treat your neighbors his way. Treat your brethren and love your brethren his way. Seek the lost his way. And just keep trusting his methods. Just because you go through a dry spell or a tough moment doesn't mean you give up. That's when you start leaning into Jesus more and doing it his way more. Take his counsel and go do it. And that's what we see Peter doing right here. All right, let's look at Luke 5, 9, and 10. I think I got about 10 minutes left, and I got a few things I want to point out. Verse 9 says this. He and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish. They do it Jesus' way, and they're astonished at the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And all I want you to see from this, God's plan still produces positive results. If you'll do it his way, it can still bring positive results. The next phrase, it's about the reaction Peter and the other apostles give to Jesus. It's utter astonishment. In fact, Peter says to Jesus, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. And I think there's a simple lesson there. It's only men who recognize their unholiness in comparison to a holy God, their unworthiness in comparison to a worthy God, and their unrighteousness next to a righteous God who will declare him the most effectively. We realize I can't do it by myself. I can't do it with my own wisdom. I've got to trust you. And when I trust you, Lord, I know that you can bless it. And Simon realizes this about himself and begins to trust Jesus more. Jesus can do amazing things in your life today. He can produce a school of fish to what was a fishless day at the lake. And I think there's some other points we can make. Jesus can take a broken marriage and he can heal it. He can take a wounded soul. He can mend it. He can take a sinful scorner. He can turn him into a saint. He can take a deteriorating drunk. And he can turn him into a disciple. He can take a dead church and he can bring it back to life. And he can take a soiled city and clean it up. If we'll have some faith in the power of Jesus, he can work astonishing results. And so trust in God's plan and trust that God can still do great things if we trust his plan and we work it. There was, I was just in Keith's office a minute ago and I saw this racquetball racket back there. And people used to joke when I was in Kokomo that I had a racquetball ministry because I would sometimes play racquetball with people. And we happened to baptize, I think, 2 or 3 of the people that I played racquetball with. When we just get together, because we play some racquetball after we got done playing, during breaks when we tired, we just sit there and we just start talking about spiritual things. There was one guy, I remember, this guy converted to Jesus Christ, but when I first met him, this man was married to one of our members that was at Kokomo. And when I first met him, it was because she had invited us over to her house. We were having a gospel meeting, and she had the preacher over for dinner, and she had us over for dinner. And she thought, well, maybe if I had you guys over, I haven't been able to get him to come to church, but maybe if I had you over and he could meet you, then maybe I'll have a chance to convert him. And she really wanted him to come to the Lord. We went over there. Then I asked this guy, you know how this is, right? When you're just trying to get to know people. Hey, what do you do? Where do you work? Where are you from? Tell me about you. You couldn't get a word out of him. He stonewalled me. And I sat there and I left and I thought, that guy's a jerk. He is never going to convert to Jesus Christ. You know, he's just stubborn and hard-headed and a mule. And then for some reason, a couple of years later, he shows up to church, shows up to a gospel meeting, and I'm going to be honest with you, the gospel meeting wasn't going very well that week. I think the preacher just lost his wife, and he was very depressed, and he was talking about death a lot. It was depressing. And I said to him, I know you got a sermon on what must I do to be saved. And I got some people coming, and they need to hear that sermon. So can you preach it? And he got fired up. And he found that old sermon. It was the best sermon of the week. And at the end of that week, we also would spend a little time together. But at the end of that week, he was baptized into Christ along with somebody else. Through that preaching that sermon, through coming. I asked his wife, I said, I'll be honest with you. I never saw this one coming. I didn't think we'd ever get through to him. Can you tell me what you did? She said, well, the Bible says we're supposed to pray, and I've been praying. I've been praying every day for my husband. And I've just been trying to be the person that I'm supposed to be as a Christian. And he's seen that. And it's been working on his heart. And he wanted to come. And now he's dedicated, devoted disciple of Jesus Christ. There was another, when I was in Kokomo, we converted about 8 people out of the New Age movement. Okay, you know, New Age type thinking. They've got tarot cards and crystals, and they practice yoga to find their inner self and all that stuff. And there was this girl. She ran an organic smoothie shop, and I loved her smoothies. Man, they were good. So I'd go there and get her smoothies sometime. And after I was there, I wrote an article in the bulletin. It was called The Organic Gospel. Because she was very big into no added preservatives or additives and no fake ingredients. Everything's real and fresh, and, non-GMO and all that stuff. And I said, you know what? That reminds me of who Jesus is. And it reminds me of the gospel. It reminds me really of just the philosophy of our church. We just want Jesus, and we just want the Bible, and we don't want any added ingredients or traditions or any of that other junk that man has brought in and kind of ruined religion. We just want Jesus. So I wrote an article about it. So would you mind reading this article? Because you were my inspiration for it. So I buy my smoothie, I give her this article from a bulletin, that's all. She reads it. She comes to Bible study that night. I do the invitation, 5-minute invitation. She comes forward and sits on the front row. She says, that's the clearest thing I've ever heard. I want to get baptized. And she gets baptized that night. Through her, there were 7 other people out of the New Age movement that came. And I preached on the New Age movement too. It's like a 4-lesson series, so that also was helpful. But through her, 7 other people who are just straight up hippies, who you never thought would be in the back of a church building, they all convert to Jesus Christ and become Christians. If you just have a little bit of faith, that if I share the gospel with somebody, it could be something as simple as a bulletin article that you hand to your waitress at Sunday lunch. It could be something as simple as that, but planting those seeds, you can get somewhere if you'll have a little bit of trust. I was at another church, this was in Illinois, and I preached, this is one of my first gospel meetings. I think I was like 23 or 24. And I preached a meeting here, and when I went there, they had me back 4 years later. You know, they said, come back in, I don't know what it was, 2006. And in my mind, I thought, well, I'll come back if you're still here. Because I thought that church was dead as a hammer. You know, they were older, and it didn't seem like anything was going anywhere, and it seemed like it was dying. And I come back, and they've got a new preacher who's been there about a year. And when I come back, instead of the people who were there, they doubled in size. They had a whole bunch of young people from the University of Illinois who were coming there, about 10 of them. And I'm staying with the preacher that week, and I said to him, I'll be honest, I thought this church was dead, and it is one of the most vibrant churches I've visited now. What happened? He said the same thing. Actually, take a look at this. He said, in Matthew chapter 9, one of the things that Jesus says is this, when he sees the people who are weary and they're like sheep having no shepherd. In verse 37, Jesus says to his disciples, the harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And then in verse 38, he says, therefore, go out and teach people. What's he say? Step 1. Therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. He said, when I got here, we just started praying for this church, praying that God would send us laborers, that God would transform some people into laborers. He said, when we started praying, people started coming. We had a couple families move in that were just great for us. We started getting people walking through the door. We started teaching them, converting them, working with them. And by just doing that, God did something. God did something with this church. And it's a great group now. I'll be there actually this fall at a meeting as well. So I'm excited to be back with them. But it's just a great group. But people started praying, trusted, and God did something with it. I could tell you story after story. But let's finish with verses 10 and 11. Jesus says in verse 10, Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. He takes that object lesson, and here's the ultimate point. From now on, you will catch men. Peter, I'm not trying to teach you this lesson to help you be a better fisherman. I'm teaching you this because I want you to know that if you trust me when it comes to catching fish, trust me when it comes to catching men. So when they had brought their boats to land, they forsook all, and they followed him. It's going to take some sacrifice, some surrender, as you come to the Lord and do his will. And you see that from the apostles. But if you'll buy in, make the sacrifices you need to make, realize that God can do something with you. Oh, I have 3 more pages of notes. We're not getting to those. Matthew 4:19. Jesus simply says, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. If you'll follow him, I think he can do good work. I think you're already seeing good work in this congregation. And I think you'll continue to see that the more that you buy in and everybody gets involved and doing the simple things that you can do in your sphere of influence to try to talk to and to win people to Jesus. So I encourage you to do that, brethren. Thanks for your attention.